Alright, YouTube, Occult Literature video number 54, The Universal Fortune Teller, this time the 1790 edition. This one being substantially longer than the later 1800s edition by 40. Link in the description to where you can purchase my edition of this work off of Amazon. Second link to my books blog. Many other occult materials available there. The Universal Fortune Teller of 1790 is, shall we say, a little bit more bawdy than the 1800s version. For example, the common use of the word whore or whoredom, vixens, harlots, things like that. It's a sign of the times in one manner. Sort of in the late, dying twilight of the Enlightenment era, we're talking about the late 1700s here, there wasn't so much of a problem within society, and it openly mentions cuckoldry and things like that. And it doesn't stress that people should be necessarily punished for it, but that it's ruled sort of by fate. It's ruled by the stars in some way. As opposed to in the 1800s, you have the revival of sort of evangelical sentiment, and things like that are deeply, deeply frowned upon. You're not going to find a whole lot of it in literature. It's been cleaned up in the 1860 version, obviously, which is based more or less on this older work. This one is almost 100 pages in length, with a modern format. So it's a significantly longer work as well than the later Universal Fortune Teller. It's part of this tradition, this intertwined tradition of the Oracle and the Fortune Teller work. As I've discussed before, this is the first one within that tradition that I can perceive of. It's a very good work altogether. It covers palmistry, although it does so in fairly brief detail compared with certain other works. It covers a great deal of astrology. It goes well beyond simply discussing the zodiac and sort of the 7 planets ruling and revolving around the zodiac. It goes much, much further than that. It goes into literally the minutes and hours. It goes into astrological terms and their meanings. It's fairly in-depth. Now, the dream interpretation passage of this work also lends itself to Touzy's work in 1884. Which is, of course, Napoleon's Oraculum. The Oraculum contains a much longer segment on dream interpretation than this one. This also covers moles and their meanings, their presence on the body. Unlike the Philosophical Merlin, which is the earliest oracle part of the tradition within this sort of literary core of actual works, the Philosophical Merlin, which is also British and covers similar material, refers to moles as being ruled by the nativity of the person casting the actual oracle there. Within this work, though, it talks about the presence or absence of moles on certain parts of the body and what it signifies. That is, it's ruled by the fate of the stars without the oracle actually determining them. So it's a little bit different, but it's still relatively in-depth. It also contains the first rudiments of what would be in the later tradition, choosing a husband by the hair, sort of what a person's hair color and texture and style actually means as involved with their personality. You can see here the roots of sort of the anti-Irish sentiment that's in the later Fortune Teller. Oh, a person with red hair is treacherous. A person with short, curly black hair is lecherous and wants money. Sort of, I guess, a swipe at Jewish individuals at that time. It is present in this work. There is a little bit of ethnocentrism. It's not nearly as pronounced as the American work that comes later, though, let's face it. Very interesting, extremely interesting work from the period. Sort of a little bit like the Petit Albert sort of era as far as literature goes, or the Black Pullet, things like that. It's the same sort of mid to late 1700s through the early 1800s era of exploration, of the dying flames of the Enlightenment, some new zeal coming in, and it's a very good work all around. It was enjoyable to edit also. It has a couple of illustrations in it, but it's not as heavily illustrated as certain other works within the tradition. That being said, the most interesting content here is probably the very early treatise upon dream interpretation, twain with the astrological content, which takes up almost half of the work. It's the core of the work. Is within those two sections. Within this work, unlike the Oraculum, Napoleon's Oraculum of Touzy, instead of having multiple relatively short card tricks that one can use for divinatory purposes, it has one long section. It's actually delivered in poetry. which I thought was interesting. It breaks it apart between males and females quite clearly. It does omit, I can't remember the card, but in both of these texts, one card within the normal pack, the aces are removed for the purposes of casting this specific trick. You take all the cards, you shuffle them and cut the deck. You have one person do that. The person's blindfolded, you lay them all out on a table face down, sort of thinly, and then the person picks a card. And then they're allowed to pick a second card as well if the first one's really, really bad. So it's sort of like if you have bad luck the first time, maybe get a second shot, essentially. There's one long sort of section, I think it's like 20 pages of content just dedicated to this one single section, and literally all it is describing what the fortunes represent for males and females that would choose it. You also see people, you also see the work talking about the concept of opposites or a contrary nature. Whenever the card would be good for a man, it tends to be negative for a woman, and vice versa. I'm not sure how Tumblrites with multiple genders would play this particular fortune. But that being said, this one comes strongly recommended. For anyone that's into the more folkish or fortune-telling, certainly astrological side of sort of these early British works that were competing with the more notorious French cycle, with the older Latin works, and also with the rising German tradition. And these are, and the Portuguese and Spanish sort of traditions, yeah, and the American traditions. It's probably the better of the British works. It's actually more in-depth than the Philosophical Merlin. The Philosophical Merlin is basically one system, just with the prognostication added on the end, which was taken from this specific text. It's verbatim. It's exactly the same. It's an interesting work. Again, highly recommended. It took a while to edit it because it's longer. Some of it was in archaic English, but it's very, very good overall. So again, link in the description of my edition of this work. It's the Universal Fortune Teller of Mrs. Bridget, the Norwood Gypsy. There's a bit of backstory there, similar to the Oraculum. You know, oh, no, Napoleon used to carry this book around, or the Philosophical Merlin. This one is attributed to a wise old woman who was sort of uncouth and living on the fringes of society in Norwood. Second link as well to my books blog, which has more material available. That's about all. Peace out.